Welcome to another episode of America UnCanceled. I'm Matt Schlapp, along with Mercedes Schlapp. We've all seen the political persecution of Donald Trump over the past several years, but now we're seeing it in the great state of Texas with their Attorney General, Ken Paxton. Attorney General Paxton was impeached by the Texas House earlier in the year, and a conviction trial has commenced in the Texas Senate. To discuss this kind of crazy time that we're in is a very brave new member of the Texas House of Representatives and a great friend of the Schlapp family, Brian Harrison. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Matt and Mercy, great to be with you, my friends.
So let me ask you this. You gave a floor speech back in May on why you opposed this impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. Explain what was in that speech.
Sure, and I got to be clear, we do have a little bit of a gag order, so I got to keep my remarks a little bit confined to things that are in the record, or things I've said before, but I'm happy to talk to you about what I said on the floor of the Texas House that day, which is, look, the allegations against the Attorney General, of course they're concerning, but what I am far more concerned with is making sure that the Texas House of Representatives does not start doing what it may appear like the Texas House was doing, which is using the instrumentations of government, the levers of power that government possesses to criminalize, prosecute, silence people for doing nothing more than being a political enemy. As you said, this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening when people are seeing what rogue DAs and prosecutors are doing all across the country. We're seeing what they're doing to the former president of the United States, and then even here in the great state of Texas on the heels of an election. I mean, people got to remember this. The voters in the state of Texas had spoken very recently. They just reelected Attorney General Ken Paxton. And so for the House to take the steps that it did in effect, and this is just objectively true, it had the effect of overturning the election, a statewide election. And by the way, this is something that has almost never been done in the state of Texas. You have to go back almost 100 years to find an example when the state House has done something like this. And then the other thing for me that's super important to remember is that impeachments are not primarily about the guilt or innocence of the individual. I have no idea whether they're true or not. I was given no evidence. I was given less than 48 hours to contemplate nothing more than one transcript of one hearing. No witnesses were placed under oath. There was no cross-examination. There was zero due process. The Attorney General didn't have a chance to say anything on his behalf. But impeachments are about protecting our institutions most of all, because those are the things that are going to outlive us. Those are the things that will govern my children and determine whether my kids grow up in a Texas where due process matters, where a presumption of innocence matters, or whether future would-be tyrants will be able to govern by whim and edict and silence and criminalize political dissent. And I will not tolerate that.
Let me ask you a question theoretically. This question of impeachment is a little bit different from a question of conviction. Do you view it that way, that it's a higher bar as this has moved from the House to the Senate? Or just speak without talking to this particular case of Ken Paxton, which is, do senators have a higher bar to reach in order to actually remove someone who was just duly elected from office?
Yeah, well, and again, just objectively speaking about the concepts of impeachments broadly, yeah, impeachments are at their core, they're political in nature. If for criminal questions, that's why we have a criminal justice system. It's why we have the courts. And I stated in my speech that my belief is that the questions before us today, or at that time when I was voting on it, were best adjudicated in the courts or with the voters, given the information that I have. And then in this matter with the Senate, and this is just objectively true, you can read it in the rules, the answer is yes, there is a higher threshold. It's not a simple majority. Some of the pretrial motions, just a simple majority could have ruled on, but to actually find him guilty and impeach him, that does require a 2/3 threshold in the state Senate in the state of Texas. So there is a little bit of a higher bar.
So why do you think the Texas House of Representatives, why did they move towards prioritizing this impeachment?
Boy, that is a fantastic question, and it's one that I have been asking very loudly and very publicly starting before we actually took the vote. And I think I started saying publicly that on the night before the impeachment that I was extremely frustrated with the leadership of the Texas House, because we were about to vote to impeach an attorney general who, regardless what you think of the allegations, has proven that he was in fact up to the most important challenge of our time, which is pushing back against the unconstitutional tyranny coming out of the Biden administration. The Texas House chose to prioritize an impeachment of an attorney general before it had prioritized, I don't know, things that I think matter to my voters, like border security, or as we have school choice and parental empowerment sweeping the nation after 2 or 3 years of COVID and watching what the teacher unions are doing to kids across the country, the Texas State House would not even allow us to vote on school choice. They wouldn't let us vote on vaccine mandates. So it might shock a lot of your viewers to know that in the state of Texas, we still have not banned COVID vaccine mandates. The leadership of the Texas House chose to protect those. We haven't voted on, deregulation. We hadn't cut spending. We hadn't reined in emergency executive powers, something that every freedom-loving Republican elected official should be fighting for after this type of tyrannical actions we saw under COVID. So yeah, I think the priorities of the Texas House when they made the decision to bring up an impeachment for Ken Paxton were completely upside down. My voters are furious, and I absolutely took to the airwaves to complain about them at the time. And by the way, all the things I mentioned we hadn't voted on before we impeached Paxton, we still haven't voted on today.
Yeah, of course, because it's just like Washington, D.C., they focus on all the wrong things. You should know State Representative Harrison, I got to learn to be more formal with you, that CPAC's going to score this vote, both in the Senate and the House, because we think this is a really big principle. Donald Trump, people can like him, they cannot like him. It's a free country. You can vote for him, you can vote against him, but it's wrong to use perverse readings of the law to try to keep him off the ballot or to keep him from being the Republican nominee through lawfare, from bringing him through all these different legal jurisdictions. And it seems like these dastardly lessons are being learned in other states, even in a red state like Texas, where the voters already returned Ken Paxton. They knew all the issues. They got to see all the nasty television ads, and I've watched them. And then they made a decision, and by double digits, they decided to give him another term. But yet now there's an effort to try to remove him from office, having just been elected by double digits through this process. And I think it's going to make voters very cynical. Why can't they just determine with their vote who they want to be in office?
Well, that's something that this is just an objective fact. It's something I'm hearing from voters all across the state of Texas, which is that they feel like their vote is being erased here. I was hearing this at the time that we were voting in the Texas House. And to your point about, Democrats versus Republicans, this has also surprised a lot of people to know that even in the Republican-led state of Texas, in the Texas House, there were more Democrats that voted for this impeachment of Ken Paxton than there were Republicans. So it's objectively true. This was a Democrat effort in the Texas House to do something that they could not do at the ballot box, which is to remove a very popular, very conservative Republican attorney general. And like one of my colleagues took to Twitter this morning, right before the trial commenced, to simply say, hey, if all of the Republican, quote, air quote, Republican leadership of the Texas House was so concerned about these allegations against Ken Paxton, why were they silent last year during the primary season when they could have had a voice and could have done something about it? I think that's a very good question that merits a lot of answers. And the impeachment managers in the Texas House themselves, again, this is all public, they were clear when they dropped the articles of impeachment that if the Attorney General simply hadn't come to the legislature to ask for $3 million of an appropriations to deal with a whistleblower settlement issue, there never would have been impeachment. That was the argument from the House impeachment managers themselves. So implicit in their own argument is that the other concerns didn't bother them. And you're right, this is not happening in a vacuum. We have what Democrats are doing to Republicans all over the country, moving us very quickly into a post-constitutional era, moving us into an era of, this is the type of third world banana republic dictator type stuff. And we're looking at what happened to President Trump. I don't know if it's 80 or 90 felony indictments now.
91, yeah.
Where does it stop? This can't be allowed to continue. And quite frankly, Texas should be leading the charge fighting against this move to a post-constitutional America. And we did not see that in the Texas House of Representatives. And in fact, when you see Democrats across the country moving to such extreme measures and throwing Republicans in jail or trying to jail them or criminalizing them, making them commit felonies, arresting them. In the state of Texas, the Texas House of Representatives, this will shock you, put a Democrat as the chairman of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee in the state of Texas. Very nice guy, but a BLM, anti-Second Amendment, far-left liberal Democrat is the person in the Texas House of Representatives in control of all criminal law in the state of Texas. I mean, can you fathom such a thing?
No, it's insane. And you tweeted out, Texas House leadership colluded with Democrats to kill every single serious border security bill this session. So what is going on with the House leadership? Why is this happening? I mean, I'm assuming that this is not what the people of Texas want.
It's absolutely not what the people of Texas want. It's absolutely a slap in the face to the voters of Texas who elected Republicans to the governor's office, to the lieutenant governor's office, to every statewide office in the state of Texas, and gave Republicans huge majorities in the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate. They voted Republicans in huge numbers, and they demand and they deserve conservative leadership. But unfortunately, the leadership of the Texas House, who is completely beholden to Democrats, I mean, this is going to shock you, almost, if not every single Democrat in the Texas House voted for the current, quote-unquote, Republican Speaker of the Texas House. It would be as if Kevin McCarthy campaigned with the Democrats in Congress to become the Speaker and then turned around. This would be the exact same comparison. After Kevin McCarthy won, if he had turned around and said, hey, Nancy Pelosi, I know I beat you, but why don't you chair the Energy and Commerce Committee? Hey, AOC, why don't you come over here and chair Ways and Means? It is literally that is what's happening in the state of Texas. Nobody outside of Austin is barely aware of this. When they are, they either don't believe you or are completely shocked. So in Texas, the Democrats in the Texas House win even when they lose to the ballot box. And I'm not talking about a couple token committees. I'm talking about far left liberal Democrats of very consequential committees.
Wow. We've read about the voting with their feet phenomenon as people in blue states have shifted to red states like Texas and Florida and Georgia and Tennessee and other great states to avoid the madness of woke communism, socialism, Marxism, CRT, and gender confusion and all the rest. So we've seen that Florida be transformed, Mercy's home state, where it was kind of like a coin flip every time to see whether the R would win or D would win. Believe it or not, Brian, I grew up in Houston, Texas for the first 8 years of my life. I was a Houston Oilers fan also. I want that to be clear. I
didn't know I was talking to a Texan, and I won't hold that last part against you.
Well, I know in Texas you have to be born there, so maybe they wouldn't all consider me that. But the point is that, we also saw in Texas, all these statewide offices in the state of Texas that you just went through, they were really tight races going down to the wire, and they all won big. And one of the reasons they won big is that the demographics of the state obviously have shifted in a more positive way. Are you really saying that that's maybe not true? Maybe at the end of the day, yes, we elected more Republicans, but the state itself is more moderate than the state of Florida? Or do we just have gutless leaders that just don't understand what the people want?
Well, it's a really good question. And no, I don't think that the state of Texas is more moderate than a lot of folks would believe. I think the state of Texas, and I have 200,000 constituents, Texans are very conservative. They believe and embrace the principles that made our state and our country great. Freedom, individual liberty, governments that are constrained in their power by the limits placed on them by the Constitution. The problem is you have too many Republicans who understand that you have to be a Republican to get elected, so they run as a Republican. But then when they get down to Austin, it's just like D.C., where all of the pressure is to cave and to sell your voters out and to move to the left. That's how you get your $200 steak dinners every night and invitations out to hunting trips on the weekends, that the lobbyists are going to foot the bill for. It's all of that pressure coupled with the fact that I think there are several people that would run as a Democrat if it was politically advantageous to do this. And just by way of example, and this will shock you, after what we saw, the destructive nature of teacher unions all across the country during COVID and the 2 years since, we currently have a Speaker of the House, the Texas House of Representatives, that is proud of and brags about being supported by and supporting the teachers unions, including the NEA. So we just have a lot of Republicans in Texas that get elected telling their voters they're going to fight for conservatism. But when they get for office, they cave to the liberal special interests and sell their voters downriver. And that's just got to stop.
So let me ask you this. As we go into this next stage, what is the next step on these impeachment proceedings, number one? And number two, on this issue of border security, I mean, obviously, is that the top issue right now in Texas? Is what's driving the politics in Texas right now?
Sure. To tackle those in order, what we had today in the Senate was just a bunch of sort of pretrial motions, parliamentary requests. So there were some motions to maybe just dismiss the whole thing on summary judgment. Those were not successful. So what you're going to see in the Senate over the next, we don't know how long it's going to be, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4, 6 weeks, we don't know, is something that looks very familiar to a lot of people, very similar to a lot of other trials. The impeachment managers will make their case, and the defense side will have a chance to make their case. They'll get to cross-examine the witnesses, and evidence will be heard. And at the end of it, the senators will vote. They need a 2/3 majority to convict, and so that would mean, I believe, 21 senators would have to vote for it. And given the breakdown of the Senate, I think that means what you would have to see is 10 Republican senators vote to impeach Ken Paxton. So that's what you're going to see over the next month or so. And then, yeah, on the border, I mean, there may be no bigger issue right now, not just in America, but especially here in the state of Texas. I mean, we're the first impacted, and we are the most impacted by the humanitarian, national security, economic disaster that is the Biden border crisis. I mean, and as you all know very well, when Joe Biden took office, he inherited the most secure border that our nation has ever known, and he has been trying to, including in ways that are violative of federal law, do everything in his power to tear open the entirety of our southern border. And so while it's not our fault, the responsibility for the Biden border crisis is squarely on Biden and Kamala Harris's shoulders. Right. But because we're so impacted, I believe we have to do everything we can to step up and do what Joe Biden won't and secure that border. And in the Texas House of Representatives, every single serious border security proposal was killed by the Texas House Republican leadership colluding with the Democrats to keep those bills off the floor. We didn't have a chance to debate or vote a single serious border security bill, and that's outrageous.
What's the most concerning thing to you on kind of like the global stage? And the secondary part of that, Brian, you've been in politics a long time. How troubling is Joe Biden's constant vacationing, not being able to give answers about national security issues? How troubling is this to you?
No, I think the biggest thing at more of the geopolitical level is something that's very hard to quantify, but I believe firmly to my core that it's true, and I think we're seeing it borne out empirically by the action of people who are or would be American adversaries, and that's the perception of extreme weakness on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military. And I would point people to probably the best emblematic example that fully encapsulates the Joe Biden America Last policy than the way he withdrew from Afghanistan. You know, I am hardly one of these people that thinks that American troops need to be in every country solving every problem on the globe. But even if it was time to come back from there, you don't do it in such a way as to have the loss of life, the loss of treasure, and to effectively end up arming our enemies in the process. And look, my heart breaks for the families that were involved in that tragic decision, but I think that decision really set the tone for what we're seeing across the globe, because not only does it disempower, it's harmful, it's threatening to our troops, to our interests, but I don't think there's anything that is more emboldening to somebody who either is or would be an adversary of the United States to know that they would have no resistance or no appropriate resistance from the current commander-in-chief. So I think that's the biggest problem in Joe Biden's foreign policy.
But I do want to thank you, Representative Brian Harrison, who I had the real great honor of working with during the Trump administration. And also thank you for your bravery and your courage as you're dealing with these issues down in Texas.
Well, it's always great to talk to you, my friends. Thank you for serving alongside me. We did a lot of great things for the American people. And look, I think any Republican who runs for elected office, your goal can't be to make friends. Your goal has to be to do the right thing so that my kids, your kids, and their grandkids can inherit a freer and prosperous Texas and United States of America. So great to talk to you.
Man, I applaud to that. And remember, if you want to watch an episode, you can always go back and check out our website at cpac.org/now, or you can listen wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you all next time. God bless.